In this video, you will learn when and what to feed your sourdough starter, along with an explanation of why. Hi, I'm Ron, and thanks for clicking on this video. And if you're new here, please check the subscribe button and notification bell, as well as viewing other videos on my YouTube channel. Lately, I've received several questions about feeding sourdough starter, and on Facebook, I've seen several questions posted also asking about when and what to feed sourdough starter. This video answers those questions. My starter sits on the kitchen counter each day until it receives its daily feeding to make sourdough. This jar contains about 50 grams of sourdough starter and was fed yesterday 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water, bringing the total sourdough starter to about 250 grams. After doubling in volume, 200 grams of sourdough starter was removed for yesterday's sourdough bread recipe. It's now the following day, and this jar of sourdough starter has been sitting on my kitchen counter nearly 24 hours. If you look closely, you can see evidence of activity from all the bubbles. Here's a view from the top of the same jar. Again, you can see evidence of activity from the bubbles recently surfaced, as well as several other bubbles about to break through the surface. Well, as I mentioned, it's the following day and time to feed my sourdough starter 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water for today's bread recipe. I keep my flour that I use to feed my starter in this silver canister, which consists of 1/3 rye flour, 1/3 whole wheat flour, and 1/3 all-purpose flour. I include rye flour for several reasons. It has a high level of enzymes that attract a variety of yeasts, causing the sourdough starter to be very active and ferment quicker. Both rye flour and whole wheat flour absorb relatively large amounts of water, keeping the crumb moist and softer longer than white flour. Rye flour and whole wheat flour also contribute a unique flavor to my sourdough bread. All-purpose flour is added to complement the rye flour and whole wheat flour. Whenever possible, I grind my own whole wheat flour so no part of the wheat berry is removed. Also pictured here are 2 jars of sourdough starter. I keep one on the kitchen counter and one in the fridge. Then I rotate them every week or two. I only have a small amount of feeding flour left in my silver canister, so I'll have to mix some more. I used my last bag of rye flour, which had 380 grams of flour in it, so I also added 380 grams of whole wheat flour and 380 grams of all-purpose flour. Then I added some of the mixture to the jar of sourdough starter to bring the total feeding of flour in the jar to 100 grams. The jar of starter is placed in this proofing box with the temperature set at 82 degrees until the sourdough starter doubles in volume, which usually takes 3 to 4 hours. The sourdough starter has doubled in volume. 200 grams of sourdough starter will be removed for today's sourdough bread recipe, leaving behind in the jar approximately 50 grams of sourdough starter. The jar will be returned to the kitchen counter until tomorrow or the next day when it will be fed again. If I were not going to make sourdough bread again for longer than 3 days, I would place this jar of sourdough starter in the fridge. 200 grams of sourdough starter have been removed from the jar and will be mixed with bread flour, water, and salt. Although there is 5 times as much bread flour as sourdough starter, the mixture of flours in the sourdough starter will still contribute greatly to the flavor of the sourdough bread. Here is some of the sourdough bread I baked today from yesterday's sourdough starter. If you're still struggling with your sourdough starter, leave a comment below this YouTube video and I'll tell you how you can receive 100 grams of my sourdough starter for only the cost of postage. Thanks again for watching and make it a great day.